We're right in the middle of Psalm 92. Yesterday we looked at the one who has found gladness and joy in the Lord. But not everybody finds gladness and joy in the Lord. Most people miss that gladness. Most people do not experience that. And he begins to talk about those in verse 6, and those who have ignored the goodness of God, the loving kindness of God, and the faithfulness of God. In verse 6 he says, "A senseless man has no knowledge, nor does a stupid man understand this, that when the wicked sprouted up like grass, and all who did iniquity flourished, it was only that they might be destroyed forevermore. But you, O Lord, are on high. For behold your enemies, O Lord, for behold your enemies will perish, all who do iniquity will be scattered." Now he calls these people in verse 6, senseless and even stupid. Those are pretty hard terms, aren't they? But he's saying those people that have never connected the dots of life, connected the dots with themselves and God, and even the issues of life as they live it, they're foolish, they're senseless, they're stupid. And what he's talking about here in particular is they live for the temporary life around them. They don't see that life is temporary. They don't see it's vanishing. They don't see that it's unsteady and you can't trust in it. And therefore, they ultimately pay the price for doing that. And therefore, they're foolish and they are senseless. But that doesn't have to be the case for the Christian or the believer. And so we go down now to verse 10, and he begins to talk about the righteous and what their life can be. And this is why he's glad. As we look at this, in verse 8 he says, "But you, O Lord, are on high forever." So he starts with who God is and the greatness and the majesty of God. That's his starting point. Then he moves on down to verse 10, beginning to look at what a person who understands that, what their life is like. First of all, they live with strength and courage. Verse 10, "But you have exalted my horn like that of a wild ox. I have been anointed with fresh oil, and my eye has looked exuberantly upon my foes. My ears hear of the evildoers who rise up against me." This picture of the wild ox and so forth, he's speaking of strength, of courage, of being able to live in that way. So he says that is the lifestyle of the Christian. We don't live in fear of all things. We don't run and hide. We're not given, as Paul told Timothy, a spirit of fearfulness. We have courage and strength in him. Secondly, we will flourish, verse 13. "Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God." What a beautiful word, flourish, to really sprout, to do well. My wife likes to plant flowers and different things in the yard, and she's very happy when they flourish, when they grow and they bloom and they do all the things they're supposed to do. If they wilt or die, she's not very happy. We want vegetation that flourishes, right? And we want to have a Christian life that flourishes. And so he says those that are planted in the house of the Lord, they flourish. That is, in the Old Testament, the house of the Lord was the place where God's presence was localized. The planted in him, rooted in him, we flourish. Thirdly, we will yield fruit in our old age. What an interesting verse 14 is. They still yield fruit in old age, and they will be full of sap and very green. This is a very picturesque verse of Scripture, I think. What he's saying here is a person who lives like this, a person who has been grounded and rooted in the Lord himself, who has flourished throughout his life, when they get older, they continue to bear fruit. It's a sad thing to think of a Christian, a believer who lacks flourishing, who no longer bears fruit, who grow old and say, well, I followed the Lord when I was young. I served him when I was youthful. Let the kids do it now. I've heard numerous people say that in the past. I honestly haven't heard it a lot recently, and I'm glad to say that. I've heard people say, well, I don't want to help out here or there. I've served my time. Let the young people do it. What a sad idea. Those who have walked with the Lord throughout their life simply can't get enough of serving him. And in old age, they still bear fruit. And it says here they're full of sap and very green. That means they stay fresh and green. They're still viable. They're still useful. Of course, it's age appropriate. There are things that older folks cannot do, but we don't just walk away. We don't just give up. As long as the Lord places us here on earth and leaves us here, He has things for us to do. And so even in old age, our life is full of the gladness and the joy of serving Him. And then finally, we declare the greatness of God in verse 15. That's why this person is glad, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock. There is no unrighteousness in Him. Notice three things that are being declared by this type of person who is glad in the Lord. They declare that the Lord is upright. He's never going to deceive us. He's never going to lead us astray. He's never unrighteous or unjust. He's always upright. Secondly, He is my rock. So He's our firm foundation. It's on Him that we rest. It's on Him that we stand. And there's no unrighteousness in Him, no sinfulness. He never has any form of wickedness, never any bad motives in our lives. And so we've learned that through life, and we live that way. And so in the context of verse 14 of the older saint, we realize that we have lived our whole life fleshing out this kind of God in our lives. And it's no wonder we come to the end of life, to those latter years, and we can still say, the Lord is upright, the Lord is my rock, there's no unrighteousness in Him. No wonder this psalmist is glad, and we can be glad too in Him. I hope you are. We'll see you next week.